these, and I would ask that everybody silence your communication devices on your desk or cell phone so that we don't get any feedback. During the meeting, all of the board members and staff will be placed on mute by the host, and we're unmuting just the board members and some of the staff. So after each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment, and we'll have that opportunity. I'd like to also just make sure that if you're participating on Zoom, you can see that the list of participants are on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you want to make comments, please click on the gray raise your hand button. That'll let us know that you want to provide comment, and we'll be added to the list, and we'll be able to call you and unmute you. So for those of you calling in by phone only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you'd like to comment, and your name will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Just a few items regarding decorum. Please adhere to the speaker time limit that will be displayed on the screen. Please treat others with courtesy and civility and respect during the public meeting process. We have rules prohibiting the use of signs and posters, and profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures are prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting are also prohibited. And any violation of the above rules can result in your mic being muted, your video feed shut off, or you're being dropped from the phone or Zoom meetings. And with that, we are about to begin, and I turn it to the chairman.
Good morning, everybody. This is really strange. I never thought I'd live to see the day where I'd be looking at all of you in little squares on a computer screen, but I guess that's what it is. I'd like to welcome you to April 3rd, 2020 Governing Board meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We're going to open the meeting today with opening comments by my colleagues who have some. Do any of my colleagues, how do they raise their hand there, Wayne?
Well, the board members can actually just start speaking. They can also raise their hand, as Vice Chair Benoit just did.
I thought we had a button on here that raised their hand on the side of the screen. Oh yeah.
Well, the board members are special, Mr. Chairman. You guys, all your mics are hot. So if you can, they can just go ahead.
And our video is up too, so.
Yeah, so why don't you start, Ben, since you were the first one to get your hand up.
Well, I just want to make an opening comment because we've now run, I think, at least 2 or 3 meetings in this fashion. We did stationary source over 2 weeks ago now, as well as we have then did a meeting for our board member assistants. And I just want to compliment staff. You guys have been out and ahead of a lot of our other agencies who are just next week probably going to have to start doing meetings like this. And I want to say that you guys have done a great job prepping for this, testing for this, figuring out how to make every bit of the Zoom meeting application work. And I think our staff's done a great job doing that. So I just want to compliment staff on all the yeoman's work they've done to both get all of our staff operational at their individual homes, and then now also accommodate this meeting in a way that, as the chairman said, was probably unthinkable just a month ago. I don't think any of us thought that this is where it would go so quickly. And I just, again, want to compliment staff. You've done a great job. And I've been taking that, your progress and your great work and sharing it with my other fellow agencies and other stuff here in Riverside County. And we'll be successful because of your success. And thank you.
Any other comments by any of my other colleagues?
How do you turn it?
It says Jessica, but isn't that Supervisor Rutherford? Is Supervisor Rutherford here today?
Yes.
Yes.
Where?
Supervisor Rutherford is here.
Is where?
Her video appears. Oh no.
Oh, there she is. I got her. I got her. Is she muted? Janice, can you hear me?
She's not muted.
She can't hear me.
Supervisor Rutherford, can you hear us?
No.
Can't. That's interesting.
It looked like she tried to speak.
Yes, Carlos?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was trying to mute and it said the host had muted me, so I didn't know if my wife had gotten word into him to mute me or not. But
As a matter of fact, we did get an email.
Hi, Wayne.
Hi,
well,
Supervisor. Okay, you're back up. Thanks.
just good
I'm
morning.
back. I have no sound. I can't hear anything. So I'm trying to play around, but I've never had this happen in a meeting before. So I don't know why I can't hear anything.
Okay.
I also don't see an ability to raise a hand or send a chat on this. Have we killed those options?
Maybe
No.
we could host
On the-
mute for a moment so that we can conduct
Yeah.
business while
Okay, there's raised hand.
working through the issue.
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't we give her a minute?
Hey, Ron.
No
Mr.
problem.
Rodriguez, until she
Hang tight.
finishes her problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Bottom of the Zoom screen. Okay. It's not my computer, which is why this is so difficult. Okay. Okay. Okay, I think I've got it, but
I think you got it. Did you get it, Janice?
I'm here now. Thank you.
Uh-huh. We've been waiting on you. We've been
I
waiting.
appreciate it.
Okay, Mr. Board Member Rodriguez is just ready to make a statement. But
Ron,
we
I
waited
think he's
on you.
muted again.
He needs to be unmuted, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just good morning to colleagues and staff and those who have taken the time to participate. And just I want to echo the sentiments of Member Benoit to really appreciate the proactive steps that the staff has taken and getting out ahead as best we can under these tremendous circumstances, unprecedented in so many ways. I look forward to a productive meeting. And again, just I know we're all those who are looking out and looking to participate today. I think it goes without saying that our commitment to continuing the mission is unwavering. We look forward to a productive meeting. And best wishes to everyone's family as well during these difficult times. Thank you.
You too.
Okay. Janice, they moved you over one spot. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. I want to apologize to my colleagues. We canceled last month's admin committee meeting, and in that committee meeting, we were supposed to take up the item of the Google contract. But I think there was a blessing in disguise because it would probably be my choice to table that contract and save that $500,000 for any contingencies that we may face during this period of uncertainty. So unless I have the majority of the board to object, I'm going to ask our executive director to return that money to whatever fund it came out of.
Good move.
Okay. Now, Janice, stop smiling under your breath there.
Thank you. A wise decision.
Okay, kid. Moving along with the agenda, items 1 through 17. Do I have any abstentions on 1 through 17?
Yes, Chairman Burke, I need to announce that on item number 5, That involves a contract with the California Air Resources Board, as well as on agenda items number 7 and 8. I do not have a financial interest and no conflict of interest, but I need to announce that I am a member of the California Air Resources Board.
All right. Anyone else? Hearing none, I'll take a motion.
Dr. Burke.
Dr. Burke, hold on a second.
Supervisor-
Dr. Burke,
Yes.
Chairman Burke, I also recused myself from agenda item number 5 because of a campaign contribution from PepsiCo within the past 12 months. PepsiCo is affiliated with FL Transportation Incorporated and the New Bern Transport Corporation, which are involved in this item as well. So thank you for that.
All right.
Burke?
Yes.
Could I suggest a roll call very beginning so that we can verify everybody?
Okay.
Chairman Burke,
Call the roll.
we have Senator Delgado left the meeting, and also Buscaino also left. Let me check.
Can we mute the line 123 *** 444 that's transmitting again? Thank you. And then also we have a couple raised hands, Mr. Chair, that we probably should check and see if they have items to which they want to speak to in the consent calendar.
On my computer, I only have raised hands on the public. Can you see raised hands on the board, Ben?
Not on the board, but before we take the vote, we need to check in with the public on these items.
Oh, you mean, okay. Joy Langford, do you have anything to say? I know what you want to talk about, and it's not on any of these consent items.
No, sir.
Okay, then Emily Spokes, do you have anything on these consent items?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, yes, I
Thank
can hear you.
This was just for general public comment, so I didn't see a way to do that without just raising the hand now.
Yeah, just go ahead and raise your hand when we get to general public.
You do that in public comment at the end of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Justice? Justice, are you there? Justice is not there. Okay,
And she's not, she dropped her hand down, so I think we're good to go.
okay. Then we'll call the roll on the consent calendar.
Dr. Burke, before we call a roll on the consent calendar, can we just call a general roll for the board?
For the board meeting?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
call the attendance roll.
Okay,
Thank you.
Supervisor Barger. Supervisor Bartlett,
Here.
Councilmember Buscaino,
Buscaino was here a second ago.
He dropped off.
Joe was here 1 second ago.
He was, but it looks like he dropped off. We'll give him a
Bay,
call.
Bay, can you make a notation that Councilmember Buscaino and also Senator Delgado were present, but seemed to have dropped off for some reason?
okay. Councilmember Cacciati,
Here.
Thank you.
Board Member Krakoff,
Here.
Mayor McCallan,
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Here,
Supervisor Perez,
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Here.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Here.
Oh,
Vice
I
Chair
lost
Benoit.
my-
I'm here and I just spoke with Joe Buscaino. He says he's in the meeting, but is muted at the moment. So can someone check the list and see where else he is on the list here?
Okay,
Oh,
and Chairman Burke?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because my screen went back to my email,
go.
so I can no longer see anybody.
Okay, put her on.
And there's Senator Delgado too.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Joe Buscaino's on the call?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And my video function's not allowing me to start video. Maybe if you can
We'll start you in just a moment.
thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning, Senator Delgado.
Good morning. 12 members.
I
are
was wondering
present.
how you were sitting still, Vanessa. It was your picture.
Oh yeah, sorry. That was it's a Photoshop picture, but I'm here.
Looks good. Looks good. I tell you that. So now that we have an attendance roll, should we call the roll on the consent calendar? There's been a motion and a second.
Okay,
Yes.
start from the top.
Okay. Supervisor Barger. Supervisor Bartlett.
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino.
He's muted again.
He muted himself.
Yes.
Hey, Joe.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Buscaino, yes.
Okay. Councilmember Cacciati.
Yes.
Senator Delgado.
Yes.
Board Member Krakoff.
Yes.
Mayor McCallan.
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes.
Supervisor Perez.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford.
Yes.
Vice Chair Benoit.
Yes.
Chairman Burke.
Yes.
Motion passes 12-0.
I want to know how Ben Benoit and Gideon and Wayne all have the same, and Supervisor Bartlett and Vanessa Delgado and Janice all have the same background.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we got an email late last night that had some instructions on how to change our background along with the provided background. So I hate to say it, but check your email. It's in there.
I got that.
It's a
Okay.
special new subcommittee.
So at some point, I've been asked by a number of board members as to the relevance in the next 2 or 3 months of having a board meeting. I thought I'd put that out to my colleagues because the air quality in the South Coast right now is at an all-time record low. And so the question is, should we continue to meet and let the staff spend all the time that they are preparing for this board meeting, or should we let them continue the mission that they're on of helping with enforcement and all the other things that they have to do? I'm just throwing it out there, and I just wonder what everybody else's opinion is. I have no place to go. Trust me, I'm right here, so I'm good to have the meeting. But it's just a question. I know everybody who is captured at the house. I see Joe Buscaino on television everywhere. He was down to ship coming in. He's everywhere. He's going to catch it soon, though.
Hey, Dr. Burke, if I could, I just wanted to address the air quality issue. It's something that we've been asked by local and national media quite a bit. And the fact of the matter is that over the last 3 weeks, we've had a lot of unsettled weather. We've had a lot of rain, we've had a lot of wind. And we always generally expect that during that kind of weather, we have good air quality. I think the real challenge will be once our weather pattern returns to normal. Earlier this week, we saw it starting to get a little warmer. We started to see the haze and everything else come back. So right now, we can't say.
But Wayne, saying that, you've told us for the past couple of years that our real problem are the cars, and we can't control the cars, and there's no cars. So how do you match that up?
So we actually have data from our roadside monitors. And if we actually look at what's been happening, what we see is about a 20% decrease in truck traffic. We see about a 33% decrease in light duty vehicles. But we've always said all along, Dr. Burke, that weather is a very formative factor, a very strong factor in our air quality. And what I was just trying to point out is that when it was warm, we started to see the air quality challenges again. We'll have data within the next week or so that will actually allow us to definitively say where the air quality level is much lower than had been expected in those weather conditions.
Well, you know, when I read in the LA Times that the traffic diminishment is the reason why we have such currently good air quality, they've established themselves as the expert.
I'm not sure the LA Times are the experts when it comes to this.
Well, if you ask my next door neighbor, that's what he says, because that's the, if what you're saying is true, you need to get it out there.
We're working on that, Dr. Burke. And just one other housekeeping point. I'm sorry to do this. In order to keep the governing board members able to talk freely, we ask that you don't mute your microphone. So Ron's going to have to unmute again one of the members. So please keep your microphones hot and just realize that it's a hot mic for all of you board members. Thanks.
In my other Zoom meetings, if I may, Mr. Chair, we're able to mute ourselves and unmute ourselves. Is that an option?
It's not an option because it allows people to come in. If what we do is we control all the mics and we can control which ones are hot. So if you mute yourself when we're controlling everybody else, then you can't unmute yourself. We have to unmute.
Understood.
And-
I just, to be clear, I got 2 teenagers in the house, so I'll try to keep them in order here.
We understand.
I got so many dogs in this house, they think it's a pound.
Okay. Full disclosure.
Okay, so I assume that since no one spoke up, we go ahead with the meeting, and that's that. Moving on to item 18.
So Derek,
Item 18.
We'll be unmuting Derek in just a moment.
There we go.
here we go, Dr. Burke.
Good morning, Dr. Burke and board members. This item is an item that is going to make a change, amend the charter for a local business, small business, local government small business assistance group. This all transpired. This LGSBA group wanted to take a position on a certain item on the agenda, on the governing board agenda. And so there was no way for them to be able to take a position as an advisory group. So they requested for us to find a way for them to be able to take a position on an agenda item. And so that's what this is to allow them to recommend positions on items on the governing board agenda. And that's it.
Excuse me, Dr. Burke, if I could just add, my understanding is that this really is a clarification to the charter. They still have to go to the admin committee, and the admin committee makes the decision as to whether or not to actually forward that on to the governing board.
Okay. May I get a motion for this item?
I'll move the item as the.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk call the roll?
Supervisor Barger, Supervisor Bartlett,
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino,
Yes.
Councilmember Cacciati,
Yes.
Senator Delgado,
Yes.
Board Member Krakoff,
Yes.
Mayor McCallum,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Supervisor Perez,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
Vice Chair Benoit,
Yes.
Chairman Burke,
Yes.
motion passes 12-0.
Okay, we'll take, unless someone wants to pull one, we will then take items 19 to 25.
I'll move those items, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Would the clerk call the roll?
Supervisor Gardner, Supervisor Bartlett,
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino,
Aye.
Councilmember Cacciati,
Yes.
Senator Delgado,
Yes.
Board Member Krakoff,
Yes.
Mayor McCallum,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Supervisor Perez,
Yeah.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
Vice Chair Benoit,
Yes.
and Chairman Burke.
Yes.
Motion passes 12-0.
Okay, item 27. It's a receive and file item. Item 28. Is there any question on 27? Item 28.
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Burke and board. My name is Ian McMillan. I'm a planning and rules manager here at South Coast Aqmd. Here to talk today about a status update on our rail yard indirect source rule. A couple of quick opening thoughts before we get into this presentation. It's clear that recent circumstances have brought into much greater focus two key challenges of an effort like this. First, the importance of respiratory health. We're hearing obvious concerns about that. And second, the challenge that any new regulations like this can potentially present to industry and the economy. These 2 points were very clear to us before COVID-19, and they're even more clear to us today. What I'm going to be talking about today is this is all still at an early conceptual stage. There's still lots of opportunity for continued engagement with stakeholders as the concepts are fleshed out. And I should mention that the presentation really is planning for how to address emissions from rail once we get through this pandemic, because we will get through this pandemic. And finally, I want to mention that this is a coordinated effort with Carb. We're happy to have Carb joining us in this presentation to share how two agencies' efforts are being coordinated. Later on, I will turn over part of this presentation to Edie Chang, a Deputy Executive Officer with Carb. So with that, can we go to the next slide?
Give us just one moment, Ian.
There you go.
So we'll be on slide 2. One more. Great, thank you. So just a very quick bit of background. So we, as an agency, adopted Regulation 35 a little bit about 15 years ago that addressed railroad operations. That regulation was challenged in court by the railroads, and those rules cannot be enforced. We have learned from that experience. The authority that we have when it comes to regulating a source like rail is different than our authority for other sources. And so we are going to be taking those lessons learned as we move forward with this effort. In 2017, more recently, the board directed staff to develop both a regulatory approach as well as voluntary approach to address rail emissions. We've been receiving emissions inventory information from the two major railroads here, Union Pacific and BNSF, over the last couple of years, and we're still continuing to go through those emissions inventories. I'll just very quickly highlight some of that later on in the presentation today. And then finally, as part of the AB 617 process, we have heard from communities that this is really a top priority, and all three year one communities have highlighted rail yards as a top concern for them. And I should also mention that we had two community meetings specifically on our rail efforts with Carb, joint community meetings late in 2019, one in East LA and one out in San Bernardino. Next slide, please. So we have a number of emission sources at rail yards. There's obviously the locomotives themselves. There are a lot of trucks that go to rail yards if they're an intermodal kind of facility. TRUs or refrigeration units that are on the trailers that are often diesel powered. There's cargo handling equipment to move the containers onto the trains themselves, yard trucks that are moving containers around. So a number of different emission sources and all mobile sources at rail yards. Next slide. What we do see is that there are some emerging technologies that are quite promising to reduce emissions. Some of them are in different stages of development. So for example, an electric hybrid locomotive is being tested. There's a project right now up in the Central Valley to test a new electric hybrid locomotive. There are electric hybrid gantry cranes, which are I think would be fair to say those are actually more commercially developed now and are in use throughout the world. Electric yard trucks are starting to be introduced, including here at some of the local rail yards. There's some other more exciting projects too about, for example, zero emission top loaders. And so we're continuing to look at these new technologies and make sure that those can be implemented here. Next slide, please. So when we look at these emissions from rail yards, what we've seen is that there have been some pretty significant reductions through time. And so on the left, we see diesel particulate matter. And there was a relatively large effort a number of years back in the 2005 to 2008 timeframe to develop emission inventories and health risk assessments for all the major rail yards throughout the state. And what we've seen is that the locomotives have reduced their diesel emissions by about 50%. All other mobile sources have reduced their diesel emissions by about 90 to 95%. A similar thing is showing up when it comes to NOx. We don't have the full inventory on the same basis for NOx from 2005, but what we can see is from 2017 that locomotives are again kind of what are highlighted, and that locomotives make up about 90% of the NOx emissions, and similar on diesel particulate matter. So locomotives are really the major source of emissions that are left, though this does vary from rail yard to rail yard, and in some instances, some of these other sources are important.
Ian, is that TPD, is that tons per day?
Yes, that is tons per day.
Thank you.
Next slide. So this is a very busy graph. I want to walk through it just a little bit here. Carb receives data every year from the railroads about their locomotive activity here in South Coast. And this is a result of the 1998 MOA, Memorandum of Agreement between the railroads and the state to ensure that they are on average using tier 2 locomotives here in South Coast. And the tiers of locomotives indicate the emission standard that those engines need to operate by. And so tier 0 being the dirtiest and tier 4 being the newest and the cleanest. These are all diesel locomotives. And what we see is that each one of these colors and each bar represents the different tier and how many megawatt hours of activity. And that's just a measure of the work that each locomotive is conducting here in the South Coast. What we've seen is that since 2010, both railroads have been adhering to that MOA and have been meeting their requirements under that MOA for an average of tier 2. But what we have seen is that emissions, which is the red line, have not necessarily gone down as the activity has gone up over the last few years. And again, we recognize that times are changing. But as activity has gone up, we have seen that the emissions have actually gone up on that red line. If we could go back to that slide. Can we go back to that slide? Great. And so we've seen that those emissions have gone up, and that we see, say, for example, in 2018, that these are significant emissions. So if we're looking just really at NOx, which is, of course, the key pollutant of concern for our air basin when it comes to our regional smog, that emissions level from locomotives in the South Coast is equal to about 10% of our carrying capacity. So when I say our carrying capacity, that's the amount of NOx that can be emitted while still meeting the federal air quality standards for the 2023 ozone standard, for example. So what I want to also compare that red line with is that black dotted line. And that black dotted line shows what we believed the emissions profile was going to be from locomotives moving forward into the future. And we see that there is that divergence over the last couple of years. And if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to address that. So what we've seen is that there was an expectation originally that there would be a lot more Tier 4 locomotives. Those cleanest locomotives would be introduced faster into the fleet. And part of that is from our experience from looking at the Tier 2 standard. So in 2005, EPA had the new Tier 2 standard, and 5 years later, in 2010, about a little bit more than 65% of all locomotive activity met that Tier 2 standard here in South Coast. So very rapid introduction of that technology. That is different than the Tier 4 standard. So in 2015, the new Tier 4 standard went into effect, and here we are about 5 years later, and we're seeing less than 10% of that locomotive activity meets that Tier 4 standard. These are different technologies. The introduction is different. The business models of the railroads are different, but we are just seeing that difference. And so that is explaining a lot of that difference in what we're expecting in the emissions profile moving forward. So with this, I would like to turn over the presentation to Edie Chang for the next several slides, as she can walk through a lot of Carb's planned efforts in this area. Edie?
Great. Thank you, Ian. Can folks hear me? Yes. Okay. So thank you, Ian, and I want to thank you for inviting Carb to participate in this presentation. I think we've had a good partnership working together to tackle the locomotive question. And so we're really pleased how that's gone and looking forward to continuing to work with the district. So I'm going to start on the next slide and just talk a little bit about the kinds of things that Carb has done in the past. So Ian already mentioned that we have had agreements in the past. In 1998, we entered into an agreement with the Class 1 railroads specific to South Coast. And as you saw on the slide before, it required the railroads to have an average of Tier 2 emissions for their fleet in the South Coast by 2010. This agreement goes through 2030. And under this agreement, the railroads do provide us with information about their activity, which is posted publicly on our website. This agreement did help achieve early NOx reductions in the South Coast Air Basin. In 2005, Carb entered into a statewide rail yard agreement, and this addressed things like statewide idling limits, visible emissions reduction and repair, and early use of low sulfur diesel fuel. And then under this agreement, the railroads also conducted health risk assessments at 17 rail yards throughout the state. This agreement sunset in 2015. And then in April of 2017, Carb petitioned US EPA to move beyond Tier 4 locomotives, so for even cleaner locomotives, and to set standards for cleaner Tier 5 locomotives that would include zero emission operation in certain designated areas. South Coast and other local agencies did send letters of support for that petition. US EPA has yet to act. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to just spend a little time reviewing some of the concepts that we're looking at. These are concepts that we talked about in the workshop that Ian mentioned that we held jointly with South Coast at the end of 2019. And I do want to emphasize these are in real conceptual stage right now. We are continuing to look at the feedback that we've gotten from the workshops to try to develop them more thoroughly. Let's go to the next slide. So the first concept is a statewide locomotive emissions reduction spending account. So basically, under this concept, railroads would pay based on the emissions of the locomotives that they operate in state. So the dirtier your locomotive is, the more you're going to pay. The funds go into an account that's handled by the railroads, and then those funds could only be used to purchase Tier 4 locomotives or cleaner. The railroads would also be required to report their activity and their purchasing, and then we would make that data available publicly. Let's go to the next slide. The second concept is a limit on remanufacture. And I think you all know remanufacturing basically means that when an engine has gone through its useful life, in this case, that's about 10 years, it goes through a process to refurbish the engine and take it back to kind of its original specifications. So it goes back to the emission standard that it was first certified to. Maybe it gets a little bit better, but that's kind of the limit of what remanufacturing can do. Right now, there's no limit on how many times a locomotive engine can be remanufactured. And what that means, and we've seen that in the slides that were presented, railroads are continuing to use these older, dirtier locomotives instead of purchasing new Tier 4s. So under this concept, locomotives would not be able to operate, railroads would not be able to operate locomotives in California beyond 2 useful lifetimes. So that means that if you've been remanufactured more than once, that locomotive couldn't be used unless you could remanufacture it to meet a Tier 4 or cleaner standard. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The third concept is to have Carb adopt the federal 30-minute idling limit. So this would allow our enforcement staff to better respond to community complaints. Now, I do want to note that there are exceptions to the 30-minute idling limit for things like maintenance, maintaining pressure and air brakes. And so this doesn't mean that there would be no idling after 30 minutes, but it would give our enforcement staff authority to enforce. And if we signed MOUs with local districts, which we've done with South Coast and other districts to enforce other state regulations, that would also allow district staff to enforce. And then finally, let's go to the last slide that I have. This is our fourth concept, and this is a locomotive trade down concept. So some Class 1 switchers, which are called gen sets, they have pretty low emissions. They're equivalent to about Tier 3 emissions, but they don't work well in the ways that Class 1 railroads are using them. They actually end up needing a lot of maintenance. So these jet sets are actually better suited to Class 3, these smaller railroads. They operate really, really old locomotives. And so this concept is basically sort of what we would think of as a trade or a trickle down. So we would have these gen sets move to the Class 3 railroads so they could scrap their very, very old locomotives. Those ones would go away. And then the Class 1 railroads would purchase new Tier 4s that would operate sort of better for their operations and also much cleaner. So those are the concepts that we have been talking about with the public. As I mentioned, we had a workshop late 2019, and we're in the process of going through the feedback and doing some additional analysis in order to kind of flesh them out. And then for us, the next step would be looking at an additional workshop later this year to try to kind of get more feedback as we provide more detail on what this could look like. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it back to Ian.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to quickly go through the complementary concepts that we have been developing. So if we could go to the next slide. And this is just a quick highlight. We'll go to the next slide. So the first concept is in response to community concerns that have been raised about maintenance activities and the emissions from certain kinds of maintenance activities. And in particular, there are some kinds of activities called load testing, for example, or some kinds of idling that might have some high emissions, and those can occur at times close to homes, close to the community. There are a lot of different kinds of maintenance activities that can occur at rail yards. Not all of them have high emissions, but some can. And so the idea here is to look to really reduce those criteria pollutant emissions. And then also if we can get at those diesel particulate matter emissions as well, that's all the better, to reduce that exposure to the community from those kinds of maintenance activities. Next slide. What we've also heard from the community is really a very strong desire to get to zero emissions. And how do we get to zero emissions? And that might look different at a rail yard than it does, say, for last mile delivery for trucks or for light duty cars. And in particular, infrastructure can be a real challenge. And so what we are proposing here in this concept is that the railroads would prepare site-specific zero-emission plans and really looking at the infrastructure and what is needed to get to zero emissions on site. And we are open to the different kinds of technologies that might be available here, whether that's electric or perhaps hydrogen, or maybe if something else comes along, great. But we know that those infrastructure challenges can be real. The railroads know their sites best, and so if we can have them work with the local utilities, and if they're going to get to zero emissions, what does it actually take? And we need to go through that planning exercise first. So that's what this concept is. Next slide. Next, we wanted to take a look at our incentive programs. And the current structure right now of programs like Carl Moyer is to replace and scrap a vehicle. And while that can work well for some sectors, for example, like trucks that are operating in state, locomotives are very rarely held just in state and more commonly travel across the nation. And so replacing and scrapping locomotives often does not get all the benefit that we would want here in South Coast that we're hoping for. What we're looking at is potentially maybe slightly modifying some of the current incentive programs if possible, so that we could incentivize not entire vehicles, but as I mentioned before, the activity, the megawatt hours of use. So as more tier 4s are operated here, they don't have to be dedicated to the state, but we can try to encourage more use and preferential routing of those locomotives here. And so by doing incentives on an activity basis instead of on a vehicle basis, we think that that's something that can be really beneficial. We can maybe also look at trying to incentivize within disadvantaged communities, potentially even more. Next slide. Finally, we do still hear complaints from members of the community about smoking locomotives. That still does occur. And we also see that as part of AB 617, there is a lot of efforts on monitoring. And we know that there's a lot of new technologies that have come along with monitoring. And so we're trying to see, take a look at all these new monitoring technologies, these new efforts with AB 617, and try to see, is there something that we can do to really look at in-use locomotive emissions and try to see, well, some of these new monitoring technologies, can we actually learn something? And we've learned something on light duty vehicles from looking at in-use emissions, from trucks from looking at in-use emissions. Can we learn similar things about in-use locomotives? And we think that this can also be beneficial to the railroads because they don't want to have poorly operating locomotives that are smoking either. And so as there are ways that we can use monitoring technology to really help improve this impact. Next slide, please. So for some of these next steps, similar to what we heard from Carb, we definitely want to continue to reach out to stakeholders to develop these concepts. Additional analysis is underway and is definitely still needed, in particular looking at how the conditions are changing with the economy and how the goods movement system is responding to that. We continue to plan to partner with Carb as they develop their concepts to make sure that what they're working on and what we're working on are complementary. And we do plan to report back to the Mobile Source Committee as this effort progresses. We're not expecting any bringing any actions to the board likely until 2021, but there will be updates before that time. And with that, that ends my presentation, and we're available for any questions.
Okay, we have some public testimony on. I think it starts with Chris Chavez.
Hi, yes, thank you very much. My name is Chris Chavez. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for Coalition for Clean Air. We have a couple of questions based off the presentation, a couple comments. First, creating an emissions reduction account looks like it's going to provide credits based on existing emissions towards those who have done the least to control their emissions. We think a fair way of doing this would be to have more aggressive reduction requirements for those who have the highest emissions to start. There also needs to be a means to track and correct adverse environmental justice impacts. For example, railroad could use all their credits to increase emissions in low-income communities in communities of color, while reducing emissions in non-EJ communities. For the South Coast concepts, we do have a couple questions as well. What would the minimum distance policy be a requirement or recommendation, and would it apply to new and existing facilities? Are you proposing to require emissions capture and treatment as the emissions control equipment as part of the proposal? Will this also address staging areas, yard entrances, maintenance stops, as well as fueling stations as well? We do support the idea of doing an engineering requirement plan. I think that's a great and good step forward in bringing zero emissions equipment to the community. Regarding the incentive programs, again, I think there's a concern that having the all railroads fund this program could result in where the railroads that have done the least to reduce their emissions could benefit the most from this program. Regarding monitoring, can AQMD write NOVs for locomotive opacity violations? And if so, enhanced monitoring should be tied to enhanced enforcement. There's no need to wait for an assessment after monitoring takes place. And then lastly, question is, why hasn't AQMD continued to pursue the harmonization of its railroad rules with the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act? So that ends my questions for Coalition for Clean Air.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Robert Jimenez.
Hi, my name is Robert Jimenez, and I live in the city of Paris. I'm a freshman in college who's grown up in the Inland Empire my whole life. Although today the board is hearing an update about the rail yard indirect source rule, I'll be speaking about warehouses in my community, as the staff had originally planned for an update about the warehouses on the state. So I live in a community where I've seen hundreds of thousands of square feet and warehouses being built as I grew up.
Sir, I'm going to hold you to public comment since that does not address the item which we are currently taking up. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, Justice? Mr. Justice?
Hi.
Ms.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning. My name is Justice. I live in the city of San Bernardino, and I attended the AQMD meeting in January and spoke about the air quality in San Bernardino, how I have the lungs of a 50-year-old smoker and the 3 high school students in my city that have cancer. And I am back today with more painful stories. My coworker has missed countless days of work because her son has been hospitalized multiple times for his asthma. He is only 6 months old.
Miss Justice?
Yes.
You too. Are you talking about locomotives?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. The bad air quality in San Bernardino is not only affecting our health, but it is affecting our livelihood. These are families that live check to check, so missing work is almost impossible. My dad works outside for 10 hours a day, and he comes home every day wheezing and coughing because of his asthma. And he is only 40 years old and needs constant assistance from his inhaler. I am tired of seeing the people around me suffering from our air quality. And the air quality these last few days has been so bad that I can hardly see the mountains that are only a few miles away. COVID-19 is not an excuse to go backwards on environmental plans for the future. We need your vote in the future for an indirect source rule on rail yards, warehouses, and new development. Please prioritize the health of our people towards zero emissions for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you for testifying. Carlos de la Cruz. Miss Carlos.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the staff and for all the hard work in bringing together this virtual meeting. Obviously, we're in uncertain times and want to thank the staff for their due diligence in making this public meeting possible. I think we're painfully aware of how important not only public health outcomes are right now, but also how it connects to pre-existing conditions and our ongoing air quality and other threats that we can't yet anticipate, like COVID-19. So I think I just want to emphasize that we're at a time where we really have to look at things differently, and we can't expect the market to be able to protect public health. So, excuse me, 1 second. So I really want to encourage this board to not back away from the regulations that you've committed to. The communities that are talking today, they really see these issues as interconnected. It doesn't matter if the pollution is coming from warehouses or trucks or rail yards or ports. For them, it's the pollution that is seeping into their lungs, that is making it harder for them to go to work, making it hard for them to go to school, when they're at school, making it harder for them to breathe. And so I really encourage the board to really see their position as one that is unique, because you are a source of being able to bring industry as well as our regulators, as well as our public health officials together to be able to drive for a better zero emissions future. And I want to emphasize that there are businesses who want to be able to see certainty and be able to see a regulatory calendar that they can count on. So now is not the time to delay calendars, but rather to move ahead and commit to the calendars that have already been laid out. So I just want to thank staff for continuing this work in a really difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Yasi? Are you there?
Yes. Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
First, I'm wishing everyone well during these uncertain times and appreciate the staff who have taken this meeting to a remote level. As some of you may know, my name is Yasi Kavazadeh, and I work in the Inland Empire as a community organizer with the Sierra Club. And today, rail yards are super important for my community. BNSF is one of the largest railroad operating locomotives in my community. So although some of the people that were cut off earlier were talking about rail yards, warehouses, they live near rail yards. So I'd like to just, you can't see us, you can't feel us, but we live and breathe near those rail yards. And I'm just here to remind you that you hear in mainstream news that air pollution and the environmental impacts have been minimized from COVID-19 coronavirus. That's not true for our communities. We had a smog violation just yesterday in the Inland Empire. And nighttime ozone is a silent air pollutant affecting the air quality as well. The indirect sources facility-based measure is something essential for Southern California as we see no end in sight for goods moving. For today's report back on rail yards, it is essential we hold more opportunities for community input. 2 meetings over 2 years is simply not enough. This air district, along with Carb, is responsible for protecting and achieving clean air and safe air under the Clean Air Act, not easing or catering regulations to industries. This holds true for warehouse component of the rule. And representatives from oil and gas and businesses may forget that the impacts of air pollution that leave communities like mine with chronic respiratory illness are profound. So how do we develop progress on reaching attainment if we don't provide the rules and regulations for businesses as usual to change its act? For the board members that are uncertain about this rule, in this global time of uncertainty, please do not neglect the potential you have to make a difference in shifting industry behavior to zero emission activity and the growth of green jobs in industry. Today, I'm honored to be working with youth who are also battling uncertainty with their schooling, employment, and with their families. We hope to see more community input on rail yards and the timeline for this rule, for the facility-based indirect sources rule, to stay true with what it was said, because we've been slowly dying in our communities in the face of with the face of environmental protections cut at the federal level. We're experiencing this at the excuse of a pandemic. So I urge you all to remind yourself about the oath you swore to do this job, about why you're here this morning, about why these youth that were cut off earlier made time right before class to be on this call today. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate everyone being on, even though it's really weird right now. So take care.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Cindy Santiago.
Can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, we can hear you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Santiago, and I live in the city of Paris. I'm 16 years old, and today I made sure I had time to speak before one of my classes. And I'm simply here to ask for clean air. I live in a community where the money is prioritized over the well-being of people, where train rails are built around schools, and where factories dominate my rural community. My sister is 10 years old and goes to school next to train rails that will soon pollute her lungs and make it hard for her to breathe. This isn't only affecting her, but everyone who goes to that school or lives around the area. Try to imagine your child, sibling, or anyone you care about slowly being affected by this ongoing pollution. We are the ones who have to breathe the air, the ones who live next to factories, and the ones who are constantly ignored. Through the coronavirus pandemic, we saw a significant drop in air pollution and warming gases in cities and regions. However, my community is still feeling the effects. While this pandemic is horrific, this is what it had to take to drop emissions and to take action. We must not look at this and go backwards. Instead, we must continue to make environmental plans that will continue to reduce emission. I know you are all working very hard to do this, and I urge you to represent my community, the community that you took an oath to protect and to represent. And we need your vote in the future for an indirect source rule on rail yards, warehouses, and new development that prioritizes the health of our people towards zero emissions for our communities. And I just want to thank you for your time, and I'm very sorry for everyone that was cut off, because that was not okay. You made time, and I know I have class right now at 10, and instead I'm here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Now you're going to have to help me with this name, Annie?
It's Angie.
Angie. Wow. Yeah, my niece is named Angie, but spelled quite different.
Am I okay to speak?
Sure, go.
Okay. Hello, members of the board. I'm Angela Guzman, and I'm here to voice that there has to be more done to better railroads and warehouses. I believe that the AQMB has to dedicate itself to good change that would improve and protect the well-being of communities subject to these toxic developments. And these people are people of color and low income and have very vulnerable lungs to this COVID crisis because of all the air pollution they've been exposed to. And this development can go on without being held accountable. There has to be effective mitigation made, which will require the establishment of zero emission vehicles, because diesel is not clean. And I'm a member of this community, and I commute from Redlands to Paris on a daily basis when I was in school. And all I see is warehouses and railroads, and I literally can't catch my breath. Sometimes in the year, I just have really bad respiratory issues that keep me in bed. And so I really hope that you guys push on a real and achievable goal of zero emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Andrea?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Andrea Vidaurre. I'm with the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice. And given today's opening comments, I wanted to start off. I felt it necessary to illuminate or shed a light of what's happening during this pandemic Although I thought it was pretty obvious, you know, unless you thought that grocery stores and Amazon deliveries just magically appeared, our community's operations have not stopped. So business as usual has not stopped. And I actually found it incredibly uninformed and disrespectful to ignore the fact that medium duty and heavy duty operations are still in full force. And I don't know how many times I've had to like tell this board, and other commenters have to tell this board, but these sources of pollution of the logistics industry that make it possible for everybody to have things in their stores and for you to have things in your Amazon shopping cart are our communities, and the sources of pollution are right behind our homes. So as part of society is shutting down right now, our communities do not shut down. So our families still have to work, and they still have to go outside knowing that their lungs are extra vulnerable because of the lifetime pollution that they've had to endure. So I say this all because now more than ever, you should take this pandemic moment to realize the vulnerability that the South Coast has in recovering and fighting back a virus that attacks your respiratory system. So you all owe it to these workers and families putting themselves at risk for everybody's benefit to be working double time on these regulations like the rail yard ISR to clean up the air. You owe it to the warehouse workers and the drivers, to the farm workers and construction workers that are outside, and the medical professionals whose jobs are harder when dealing with a population who is weaker from air pollution. So we look forward to continue working with Carb and AQMD and seeing how this regulation moves forward. It actually is a huge opportunity to make these rail yards more competitive through electrification, especially as we have heavy duty and medium duty on-road automation right before us. So it goes without saying how important this rule is. And we look forward to seeing more of this rule happen and more of these meetings happening in our communities so we can inform exactly the reality and the speed that these sources of pollution need to be cleaned up at. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Kelly Roach, is Kelly Roach available?
Hi, yes, it's Kaylee. Can you hear me?
Kelly, I'm sorry.
Hi, it's okay. My name is Kaylee Roach, and I am a student at the University of Redlands and a Sierra Club volunteer. I spend the majority of my year in the Inland Empire, breathing in air pollutants from trucks coming in and out of rail yards. Through COVID-19, the world has demonstrated the amazing ability we have to take action on an issue when we see it as an emergency. And poor air quality is an emergency, especially when the most vulnerable to COVID-19 are those whose respiratory health is at risk due to bad air pollution. So I ask for your vote on a healthy and prosperous future on an indirect source rule that prioritizes the health of the community. I appreciate your work on this board, especially during these times, and urge you all to move towards zero emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. The next person has a series of numbers. So I don't know how to deal with that. The legal needs to tell me because we can't let people testify unless they have a name. So
This, Dr. Burke, this is Ron Moskowitz.
Yes.
This is a phone number that begins with 951 and ends with 994, and they're unmuted.
They are what?
Unmuted.
Dr. Burke, I would just suggest that they state their name and start their testimony.
Okay. Have you heard 1951? Are you there?
So the person on the phone.
Hello?
There
Hello?
you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Gabriela Mendez. I am with CCAJ, the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice. But most importantly, I'm a resident of the Inland Empire. And I would like to urge the AQMD to focus on creating a strong rule. So to not lose your focus off of this rule, because it's been in the making for close to 15 years. And the community has been waiting a long time for this to happen, as they are already suffering a lot of the impacts that come from this rail yard. Now more than ever, should the staff and board focus on cleaning up our air quality. I demand that
you do not help the rulemaking, especially around something as significant as the rail yard in San Bernardino. Right now, this is a very calling time because due to COVID-19, as we all know, right, this virus is, this can impact people who have, or makes people who have respiratory issues more susceptible to this virus. So what are we going to do in the future, right? Like right now, the air may be doing okay. I mean, not true in San Bernardino, right? But the air may be doing fine or better, but what happens, right, when another epidemic breaks out or when something else happens like this, and folks who have bad lungs, they are susceptible to this again. What are we going to do then, right? So I think right now, more than ever, should be an opportunity to focus on cleaning up our air and focusing and not halting the rule decision making on the rail yard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Dr. Burke, could the caller please repeat her first and last name for the minutes?
It was Gabriela Mendez.
Thank you.
Okay, Maya, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Okay. Hi, my name is Maya VR. I'm 21 years old and I'm a student at the University of Redlands. I had asthma living in LA before I went to Redlands, and now that I'm there, it's gotten a lot worse. And I've been meeting a lot of people who are in danger because of the neglect to their communities in the Inland Empire. Yeah, I have a few questions about the proposal. I think that the plan does not seem to involve enough depth because there are no local accounts or testimonies in the plan, and that there should also be local accounts and testimonies in the development of the project and before the project. There's this thing called pre-prior and informed consent, and I feel like that is not taken into effect during.
Maya, could you please speak into your microphone? We can barely hear you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you know what free, prior, and informed consent is. So I'd just like to say that I feel like that should have been involved in this project with the local people who live in the communities that are being developed in. Someone's also shuffling, so if you can't hear me because of that, it's possible. I'm sorry. I would like to say also that is it possible to do site-specific and vehicle-specific plans? And if the railroad pays for emissions that it creates, could the pay go to compensation for people whose health has been damaged by development? And the last thing I'd like to say is to echo someone else in that it doesn't seem like regulations or goals are being followed through by the committee if they're the ones who regulate them. Because of the analysis in 2020 that under 10% of locomotive activity would meet Tier 4 standards, which is a standard that y'all set up. So I'd just like to echo that I feel like there's no regulation enforcement really happening in the communities they're supposed to. And thank you all for coming out. Hope you have nice days.
Thank you for your testimony. And you have a nice day. Angie, are you there?
Yes, please bear with me. I've been having some breathing issues for the past couple of weeks. Good morning, board and staff. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. My name is Angie Valderas. I'm not only an organizer for the Sierra Club in the inland region, but I'm a resident for anything. For over 20 years, I've been living in impacted communities, cities like Bloomington, San Bernardino, and Highland. Living here for many years next to rail yards, warehouses, airports, and so on. I've always been a healthy individual, but now, lately, that hasn't been the story. I never thought I'd be more of an inhaler because my breathing is being triggered by health complications and our poor air quality. In fact, that living and breathing in the IE is crucial to many in our region. I am surrounded by warehouses, airports, and rail yards, and now dealing with the COVID-19 and feeling that my lungs cannot bear any more trauma And I know that goes a lot for many people in our region. We ask you, AQMD, to please pass regulations. And we need to treat the epidemic of poor air quality like we do the COVID-19. And we must get to zero emissions and hold leaders accountable. And I hope we could put our trust in you to do that for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Okay, Scott, you're the backup hitter.
I guess this is Scott Myers, president of OptiFuel Systems. I guess I'm the last one talking.
Yeah.
OptiFuel has, for the last 5 years, has been focused on developing near zero and zero emission locomotives. Over the last 5 years, we have been developing all of the technologies and all of the pieces to demonstrate on locomotives and out in the field with the Class 2 and Class 3 railroads. In addition, we've been getting all of the EPA and FRA and AAR certifications required to do that. Over the last 2 years, we've been really focused on trying to exceed the Tier 5 regulations in California for line haul and locomotives, and we think now it's a fairly low risk, low technology, low cost, and affordable solution. The problem of providing near zero or zero emission locomotives is not a technical issue. It is a political issue. We've had numerous conversations with EPA, in Washington, and their comment is they'd love to move forward with a Tier 5 standard, but they can't do it until there's a demonstration of a Tier 5 line haul locomotive. And because the Class 1, because of the primary manufacturers of the locomotives and the Class 1s claim there is not one. And those organizations have been focused on trying not to keep a Tier 5 locomotive out in the field. The frustration I really have is after the last 2 years is that Carb is known that there is a solution out there. Unfortunately, their problem is they want an electric solution, and we're focused on providing a renewable natural gas solution for zero emissions. So just want to let you know that there is a solution, and it's an affordable solution, and it's a proven technology. It's already been approved by EPA and FRA. We've sort of reached the point where, as a company, I've made the decision to sort of move away from California because I don't think that they have a serious interest in terms of getting a Tier 5 locomotive. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. That concludes our testimony on this issue. Do any of my colleagues have any comments before well, maybe I should say what I have to say first so that everybody has at least my historical perspective on this. The one thing about being the oldest guy around is that you can remember some things that have kind of gone into the dustbin of history. This is probably one of the top most contentious issues that this board has ever dealt with. 15 years, maybe 17 years ago, the executive director called me and said, you know, we have given $3 million to General Motors to develop a engine. And they have completed development, but they are not releasing the engine. So I said, set up a meeting with the president of General Motors. So we go back and we go to the top of that big round building there in Detroit and go into this palatial office. And the chairman of the board of General Motors says, we are not proceeding with the development of this engine because we feel that natural gas is dangerous because it can explode. So I looked at him and I said, are you going to stop putting gasoline in cars too? Because the last time I checked, gasoline explodes also. He said, oh, no, and he went through. So I got up and I walked out of the meeting, went to the airport and caught a plane back to the West Coast. And I told the executive director then that we were going to sue him. General Motors laughed at us until we hired the most aggressive environmental lawyer in the United States of America to sue him. And then a senior vice president got on a GM jet and came to California to try and negotiate their way out of releasing this engine. They never did release it. We did so. They settled, but the settlement did not include the release of a zero emission. That was 15 years ago. So here we are today working on the same stuff, trying to get there. It's insane. Now, you also have to realize that the presentation we had today by staff and by Carb left out the most important thing in this issue. And that is that the most contentious period that the South Coast Air Quality Management District has ever had in history with Carb was over the independent negotiation of an agreement with the railroads to circumvent the South Coast rule. It's fractured the relationship so bad that it was almost a decade before this institution and that institution were at least civil to each other. So this is not a easily solved, or is it a new? And the progress that's been made is not even 10% of where we were 15 years ago. So, Mr. Buscaino, I know that your district goes down to that home for the veterans down there by the shipyards. The one that's put together by the freeway.
The Cabrillo Homes in Long Beach, just east of Wilmington.
Right.
Cabrillo Villas, yeah.
You know, that whole community, I've driven in that community 4 or 5 times, and I don't want to go back. So, you know, there's a real problem down there. I'll take any comments by any of my colleagues.
If I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
You know, Metrolink has just decommissioned, if you will, its last Tier 0 locomotive. And we now, over 35 of our new Tier 4 locomotives are in service. And we're working with the community around our central maintenance facility and made many changes in our operations to reduce noise and pollution. So I know we're not the same as a tier, as a class 1 railroad, but we certainly done our part and are probably the least polluting commuter railroad in the United States.
Mr. Mayor, you know that we're not admonishing the good guys for what the bad guys do. You know,
just wanted to put it in perspective.
Yeah. So, but the bad guys are really bad, and they don't care what we do. So we got to help guys like you and bring those other guys to the standards that you have set.
It can be done.
Okay. Okay. For
Mr. Chair, Mr.
Yes.
Chair.
Mr. Yes.
Chair, after Mike.
Oh, yeah, there you are.
Thank you. I want to thank Larry for his comments. I've always brought this up regarding the distinction between the freight and the commuter rails. But as you know, as I mentioned at our meeting in downtown Los Angeles last year, there's over about 220 daily passenger diesel rail cars from Metrolink and Amtrak going through our 4-county basin, 200 plus a day. And I hope we can also, and I know Larry's doing a great job with the rest of the board there. I'm very, very impressed. But I know we had a problem for a long time right near my city in Los Angeles, the rail yard right off the 5 and the 110 right there by Los Feliz was a Metrolink maintenance yard. And a lot of the residents always had complaints. It's now going to be a large park. But somehow if we can assess just whether it's Amtrak and Metrolink too, just what the rail yard maintenance yards are doing, and even the stations when the trains pull up. You know, I've been at Amtrak waiting to go on a trip upstate or down to San Diego or up to Canada, and you sit there and you're inhaling all these fumes. So and they do have some cargo equipment there, passenger, taking some older passengers to the train. So hopefully we can also just evaluate the impacts there too to our communities, in addition to the freight, much less. And thank God Larry and the board members are working with Metrolink. But if we can also, include Amtrak in this, and just get an assessment of what the commuter rail yards and the stations also are doing to reduce pollution.
Well,
let me respond to Mr. Caccione. In the manual on quarantine, Michael, it says if you hold your left hand up like this, it blocks her right hook to your nose. So just got to read the whole manual. Okay, Mayor McCallum.
I would put up our central maintenance facility and what we've done at Metrolink as an example of how you can work with the community and reduce pollution and noise.
Okay.
Chairman Burke, if I might make a comment.
Yes. Judy?
We've had a long history of dealing with the recalcitrance of the Class 1 railroads in helping reduce emissions. And they have long taken the position that they are exempt from any regulatory authority. On trips that we took back to Washington, D.C., visiting with the rail authorities, the first words out of their mouth were, "We're exempt." So I think this is a good start. We're not really regulating the Class 1s here, but we're looking at the rail yards and regulating what we can inside those rail yards. I expect that we will get some kind of pushback on this ISR as we move it forward. But I think that what the staff has laid out here is a good beginning. And I look forward to continuing this work. Some of it is like the monitoring, which will help us evaluate what next steps we can take, as well as asking them to do zero emission plans, which should alert them to what the possibilities are for zero emission and also help us evaluate next steps as we move through this. This is just a beginning, I think, but it is hopefully a step toward better communication with the rail yards and hopefully a good relationship. Also want to comment that that this is really a good example of Carb and the local air district working together. We've had a lot of contentious issues in the past, and this is really a good step forward. Edie, thank you for coming and presenting this to our district, and thank you to the Carb staff and our staff for moving forward in a good collaborative fashion. Thank you.
But I also think that we owe you a debt of gratitude, Judy, because things changed dramatically once you got there. And so I think that we owe you a real kudos on your service at the Carb board. So thanks.
Mr. Chair, if I can.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to echo Ms. Mitchell's comments in ensuring, and first thanks the staff for the update on moving forward and being collaborative with a number of our stakeholders and our community members. As you know, representing the San Pedro Bay Port communities of Los Angeles, San Pedro, Wilmington, and even parts of Long Beach. We know that a number of these rail lines stem and come from our port complex. With that said, you know, and we have over the years have fielded a number of complaints of trains that are idling and noise impacts, of course. But with that said, I'm hopeful that aside from collaborating with our stakeholders and our community members, that we have a strong collaboration with the rail lines as well. What I don't want to see is this process be tied up in courts, because the longer, if we do tie this up in litigation, we waste time in reducing pollution in our impacted communities.
But Councilman, it's usually not us that goes to court. It's usually them that goes to court.
Yep.
So, you know, us being able to stop going to court lays in their ballpark, well, on their side of the field, not our side. You know.
That's why I'm hopeful that we would continue that collaboration, that communication.
Okay. Any other board members would like to on this issue?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Burke. Grateful for the background that you had provided for us at the outset. Disappointing to hear about that history. I look at the glass half full, and history aside, I'm optimistic with what the staff presentation had outlined. Let me just take a moment and step back for just a few moments for those who provided public comments. I think this issue and other issues, when I hear the personal stories and testimonies about the impact on one's health, issues with breathing and asthma, it's certainly something that growing up in the Inland Empire, although I represent the Orange County cities, growing up in the Inland Empire, spending most of my career there, and just being someone who suffers from asthma and having children that do as well, it does strike a chord with me. I think all of my colleagues are also concerned and about the health and welfare of all the communities that we represent. I don't believe that, certainly no, the chairman could speak for himself, but I don't think anyone was being cut off per se. I think he was really just trying to ensure that the topic at hand was rail, and other folks who want to make comments on issues that are off agenda can have every opportunity to speak later in the meeting, and we certainly are interested in those comments as well. So that said, one of the things that struck me was Mayor McCallan's comments in kind of countering, you know, there's always bad apples, but there's in everything, in every industry, and those who are even public policymakers, there's good apples and bad apples. And so it's great to hear the example that Mayor McCallan outlined. I think we can learn from that. Also, Council Member Vizcaíno talking about stakeholder engagement and staying out of the courts. One of the things that I saw from the presentation that I'm still trying to better understand is what does the rail what's their recommendations on the proposals? Do they have a comment, or have they provided any input? I'd really like to see those type of commentaries reflected at some level in the presentations, because to the point about staying out of court, I think we need to have whoever is willing to engage. I know I'm presuming that those efforts are underway, but I'm not seeing that in these presentations. I really like to understand their perspective. So a few questions. One, on one of the slides, it talked about community priority, and I know that there's been a tremendous amount of outreach, but when I hear that kind of blanket statement, I'm not clear on how that's measured. Is that measured in a quantitative manner, in a qualitative manner? Is it focus groups? Is it a percentage? It's, when we hear it's a community priority, how do we measure that? So that would be something is it 51-49? Is it 90%, 10%? Can we just get a little bit more clarity rather than a blanket statement? Although we understand it's a priority, generally speaking. So maybe some understanding on that. Again, what's the greatest obstacles to shifting to tier 4? What are those costs? I'd like to get a little bit more clarity on that. Which of the options, again, that were outlined in the great presentation, does Rail have an input on any of those 4, a preference on the other 4? Is there a 5th or 6th that they're recommending? Love to get that collaboration reflected as far as what their input is. And then finally, I'm not understanding clarity on the economic implications of these proposals and on goods movement in general. So again, as we move forward, I really would like to see those the presentation provide some color on each of the proposals, not only how they'll mitigate and improving air quality, but what are the coinciding economic implications. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I don't know who at the district keeps changing the screen, like Joe White Knot's up now, but it's very disconcerting. Mr. Rodriguez was speaking to have all that flashing in front of you. If it's not necessary, we really don't need to do that.
It's just an automatic function of the Zoom. Whoever's audio gets picked up, it switches that screen.
Correct.
So it's not anyone at the district.
How can it go to Joe? She's not even talking.
I think there's just some background noise occasionally from different microphones, including Jill's.
So Jill's muted.
No, she's muted.
She's actually not.
She was not. She is not.
On my screen.
She's muted now, but I don't think she was before.
Peanut butter.
I'm telling you, it's horrible.
So respectfully, I know with the technology challenges that we're all trying to make the best of, again, I would just respectfully request that the comments that I shared would be addressed, if not now, in the future. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez, what I thought what you said was germane. So, but you got to take into account normally the railroad's response to everything. If you ask them the time of day, they say no. If you ask them what their name is, they say no. So when you talk about having, a method by which you could have a normal conversation, it's really, really very difficult. So I just want you to be prepared for that as you go forward.
Understood, Chairman, and I think as long as we continue to extend the opportunity to have a seat at the table, if they continue to refuse it, that the onus is on them, and shame on them if that is ultimately what they do moving forward. But I think we'll continue to try to, I'm sure, make our best faith effort to figure out and get their input.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so there is no vote. There is no vote necessary on that update. So we now move to public comment.
I'm muted now. Oh, I'm not.
What? I'm hearing somebody say something.
No, go ahead. He was trying to mute himself. Joe Buschiano, but he's good now.
Okay. We have under public comment.
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Just one minor housekeeping item. If we could just have a a roll call vote just to receive and file item number 27.
You want to do a roll call to see if we have a quorum?
No, I'm sorry. Item number 27, which is the stationary source. I don't think we did a vote to receive and file that one, which is just a minor.
We don't normally vote to receive and file.
We generally do. It's just.
No, we don't. I'll be glad to do it for you, but no, we don't. If something's a receive and file, it's receive and file. Why would you have to vote on a receive and file?
I think we normally do, but maybe we don't need to.
It's okay. Well, let's go back and get a motion on 27 to make the lawyer happy.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Would the clerk call the roll?
Supervisor Bartlett,
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino,
Yes. He said he nodded, but you got to say yes, Joe.
I know I was muted. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Cacciati,
Yes.
Senator Delgado,
Yes.
Board Member Krakoff,
Yes.
Mayor McCallan,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Supervisor Perez,
Perez left the meeting.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
Vice Chair Benoit,
Yes.
and Chairman Burke.
No. Hey, man, gotta have a little quarantine stuff going. Okay. I've changed my vote to yes.
Motion passes 11-0.
Okay. So do we need then a motion on 28?
No, sir. No, sir.
No? Okay. Then we will take public comment. Joy Langford, you've been waiting patiently the entire meeting.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
We can hear you.
Awesome. So my name is Joy Langford. I have a firm called Joy Langford and Associates. I'm here on behalf of one of my clients, a Lineage Cold Storage, which is located in Long Beach at the end of the port. We are a cold storage food facility. We're about, I would say, 2 football fields wide. We have that many, that much product that's in there. We are 100% full. So about 2 years ago, we were having trouble with our neighbor on Pier B, National Gypsum. They're a gypsum concrete dust company. They have been emitting large amounts of gypsum into the air. So we decided to talk to them, speak with them, and we have been talking to them for about a year. Then it went frozen. We couldn't hear back from them, but they were still emitting plumes of dust. So we immediately started working with Aqmd, and that was about a year ago. It's been great the whole way through. We've talked from the inspector level on the way up, all the way up to legal, Victor Yip. Everybody's been great in trying to help us solve this problem. So in January of 2020, this past year, we were finally able to get headway through the agency. Crystal Villanueva put testing plates on our facility as well as National Gypsum's facility. And it was conclusive that the dust was coming over into our property and from National Gypsum. Unfortunately, due to this coronavirus situation, we have not been able to go any further with Aqmd's monitoring to bring immediate alleviation to the situation. My concern right now is pretty immediate. Our employees are very, very concerned. We are a first-line business. We are handling food product for a large part of Southern California. And employees are really starting to complain. We don't want any sort of problems with our employees not feeling safe to work, which they've already expressed that to us. Other concerns voiced by employees include dust covering employee and vendors' trucks, clogging of expensive equipment, refrigeration equipment on our end, and we don't want the dust on our roof, which gets into the refrigeration. We are asking AQMD for immediate help in trying to get them to cease and desist until your investigation can go forward after the coronavirus. Thank you for your immediate help in this situation. We've got to figure something out for our food supply.
Thank you for your testimony. Now, I discussed this matter yesterday with Wayne because I was concerned because this cold storage facility stores 40% of the frozen foods for Southern California. Now, so Wayne said that Joy should call the mayor of Long Beach. And so I called her back and I suggested that to her. But
I have not heard back from the mayor's office, just for your information. I called them about 2 months ago, and then I also tried to make contact yesterday. And I know he's probably busy with the Mercy ship coming in and that type of thing as well. So I'm going to continue to reach out to him, but that's definitely a good idea.
But
is it possible that somebody can call the—
Ms. Langford, this is not a conversation. What I was also told yesterday, what there was being not dust, but smoke emitting from the Gibson plant. Now, if there's smoke being emitted and it's going into their facility, then I believe we do have some obligation to just get an inspector down there and take a look at this. With everybody's concern for food, period, during this emergency, I'd certainly not like to have us, by not sending an inspector down there, be at fault for a large amount of the frozen foods going into our supermarkets to be destroyed. Wayne, what's your deal on this?
So Dr. Burke, we actually have been very well engaged, as Ms. Langford had said. We actually do have some analysis on material. It's not smoke. It is a combination of what we think could be perhaps water vapor, but we did also get dust. We are talking with our staff just this morning about doing some additional monitoring. We did reach out to this facility. They pretty much said that they didn't feel that they were doing anything inappropriate. We're going to utilize the most recently obtained data, have another discussion with them. And if in fact we can provide some additional monitoring that will allow us to take action, we'll do so. But we are very well aware of the situation. We're continuing to take action, and I'll keep you apprised on our efforts.
So why don't you call the mayor's office in Long Beach and find out what their people are doing and let us know.
I will be more than happy to do so.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Langford. Emily Spokes.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Just fine.
Okay, hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Spokes. I'm a member of the NELA Climate Collective. And first, I'd like to say how grateful I was to Councilmember Mitchell for her steadfast words at the joint board meeting in Long Beach on March 9th. It gave our group a lot of confidence in the AQMD, and I really appreciated seeing many familiar faces fighting for tougher restrictions on the port. That meeting took place just on the fringe of all of our lives changing permanently due to COVID-19. And as I said in my public comments that day, the response to this virus has foreshadowed the impact the climate crisis will have on us. In some ways, it's a positive that we we have learned how to think fast and make do. Yes, our air quality is better as a result, but now more than ever, citizens need confidence in their leaders, especially when it comes to the safety of our breathable air. These meetings are of utmost importance now, and like so many others, I have also been directly impacted by the pandemic. I've lost work and my salary entirely, and just trying to manage my kids' schoolwork while attending these meetings whenever possible. So I very much appreciate the you guys have made to allow the public to still participate in these extremely important meetings. I have zero confidence in our president or his administration, and I am infuriated by the EPA's unprecedented relaxation of rules for petrochemical plants and other major polluters. So I just wanted to reinforce that we need leaders that we can count on who won't place profits over people. And I really hope that you guys can be those leaders that we need so desperately right now. Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best of health.
Thank you for your testimony. Jessica Craven?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, okay, thanks. So my name is Jessica Craven. I think you all know me. I've come to several of the last board meetings. I am also a member of the NELA Climate Collective and a newly elected member of the Democratic Party County Central Committee. And I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you for making this meeting so accessible. And honestly, as much as Chairman Burke, I know that you find elements of this Zoom meeting frustrating. I do hope you all will consider continuing such teleconferencing even after the COVID crisis has lifted, because honestly, it is so much more sustainable than all of us driving from a million places to Diamond Bar. And public transportation takes about 3.5 hours. So that's just a thought. But first of all, I would like to lift up and second the voices of the young people who spoke in the last or the previous agenda item. I was really moved to hear them talk about the fact that although, yes, we can say that, oh, well, the air quality is so much better because of this very unusual situation we're in. But honestly, from a climate justice perspective, very little has changed. Nothing has changed. And I hope that we will bear that in mind. I'm assuming you were kidding at the beginning of the meeting when you talked about how the board doesn't need to meet now that the air quality is so good. I'm assuming that was a joke, and I'm sure it was, but you know, this is the attacks on our environment, as Emily just mentioned before, are just coming thicker and stronger than ever. And the EPA is using the COVID-19 crisis as an excuse to indefinitely cease enforcement of industrial air and water pollution rules and to roll back the vehicle emission standards that are key to our attempts to prevent climate change. So we are still in a terribly, terribly frightening position. And I guess I just want to say that I will continue to come to these meetings to be the voice of the sort of the mom and the average citizen and the person who has had pneumonia and worries about her lungs. I love hearing us talk about how Metrolink is doing a better job. I know people who live in Metrolink idling yards or right near them who feel that they're not doing nearly as well as they could. And just to continue to say, like, we need to continue to treat this as if our house is on fire, because it is. Thank you for all of your efforts, and please continue to accelerate them, make them stronger, make them more urgent. If we're learning anything from this COVID-19 crisis, it's that when science says that things are about to get very bad, we should listen. And I guess I would just like to say that I hope we are listening and continuing to act with incredible urgency, and thank you for all that you're doing. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your testimony. Susan Dubrowski?
Dembowski.
How you spell it? How you say it?
There's no R in it. Dembowski.
Oh, Dembowski. Okay.
Hi, my name is Susan Dembowski, and I live in Pasadena. And good morning to the board and staff. I want to thank the staff for your continuing efforts to reduce pollution from warehouse operations in our air basin, and for that presentation. I live several blocks from the 210 freeway, where heavy-duty diesel trucks carry goods round the clock from the warehouses in Riverside and San Bernardino counties on their way to the northbound Interstate 5. And where I live, the dirty diesel exhaust from these trucks emits the same nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and other pollutants as is emitted in communities closer to the warehouses. It creates smog and brings immediate health impacts to everyone here as well as there. However, as polluting as the trucks on the 210 freeway near me are, at least they move at a more efficient highway speed, so they pollute less than they do when they drive at lower speeds on local roads. Contrastingly, the diesel trucks operating in warehousing districts are substantially more polluting because of their idling and driving back and forth within the surrounding neighborhoods. Inevitably, these communities suffer far greater and more immediate adverse effects. So I urge your vote in the future for a strong indirect source rule on warehouses, rail yards, and new developments that prioritizes our health and moves towards zero emissions for all of our communities so we can all breathe easier, not just at this time, but in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Michael Zelniker?
Yep, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Michael Zelniker. I'm the co-chair of the Los Angeles chapter of the Climate Reality Project, former Vice President Al Gore's organization. Last year, we spearheaded an initiative to have LAUSD pass a resolution to transition all of their energy needs to 100% clean renewable energy on a timeline that is more aggressive than the city, county, or state. We are currently working with LACCD, the community college district, to pass their own resolution to do the same. Year after year, Los Angeles has the worst air quality in the country. This is unacceptable. Los Angeles and California have both declared themselves leaders in the movement against climate change. Clearly, not enough is being done. The largest public school district in California, along with the largest community college district, have both found the political will, despite significant budgetary challenges, to do the right thing by passing policies that will help ensure a more habitable future for our children and grandchildren and generations to come. We need to demand more of our industrial and transportation sectors. Los Angeles remains the largest urban oil field in the country. This is unacceptable. Transitioning off of fossil fuels must be happening at a faster pace. You must insist on stricter regulations and enforcement on those who are dumping CO2 and other greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, treating it like an open sewer. Bringing down the amount of greenhouse gas emissions being dumped into our atmosphere must be happening more quickly. We, the people, are dependent on you as the air quality policy-making body to protect we, the people. This is not only an environmental issue, it is one of equity and justice. Our marginalized communities, often communities of color, continue to face the most catastrophic consequences of the climate crisis. Let me close by quoting Chief Seattle. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children, close quotes. Our children are going to ask us, what were we thinking? Why didn't we do something? It's all hands on deck right now. We are running out of time. I urge the AQMD to do more, much more, as quickly as possible for the future of our planet and for all of those who inhabit it. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Maya, I thought you had to go to class.
No, I don't have class. I have night classes online. That was someone else.
Okay.
Yeah. I just think I have so much that I want to say, but a good amount of it is that I don't understand why in the presentation and like in all of your answers, there aren't really like concrete plans for our future. I feel like it shouldn't take a natural disaster or a pandemic for us to actually take the climate seriously and the local people seriously. I think that climate change is a natural disaster within itself and an impressive one systematically. I feel that the presentation didn't have any plans for the future and like it didn't tell me anything about how any of this development would impact future generations. It didn't tell me what people are doing now. It didn't tell me about any local or indigenous people having any involvement in creating the development plan. It didn't tell me if there will be involvement of them in the future. It didn't tell me what workers went through with like health hazards. I feel that a lot lacked from it, besides saying like what didn't work and what's still not working and what maybe will work at some point in the future. And I feel like that might be a lot of why people are saying, you know, that you all aren't doing enough, because like I don't know exactly who you all are. I'm sure you work hard, but it's not really being portrayed through the promises that you all are making as representatives of various communities. So that's all I have to say right now. I'm taking notes though, so probably say something in the future. Thank you very much.
I would suggest that that you look at some of our material both online and maybe even talk to some of our people to find out what, because we do have a significant program
This looks so good.
that allows us to help everybody. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Chris Chavez.
Yes, thank you again. This is Chris Chavez, Coalition for Clean Air. Just wanted to, and I appreciate what some of the other public commenters have mentioned. Recently, we submitted a letter to the South Coast Board, and we really want to urge South Coast Aqmd to continue upholding its mission in light of the economic and health uncertainties that we're going through. Because what we've seen is that a number of polluters have begun clamoring for exceptions, reducing the strength of rules, reducing enforcement, reducing monitoring, and so on. For example, at the Air Resources Board, California Air Resources Board, the California Association of Port Authorities has requested that Carb pause the development of the at-birth regulation, a regulation which will significantly reduce diesel particulate and criteria air pollutants in the South Coast Air Basin. We've seen the EPA's recent action to reduce and suspend monitoring enforcement for polluters, which is very concerning. And that in our conversations with staff, we've heard that some industries have requested for regulatory relief from the Aqmd board. It's important to remember that the South Coast Air Basin is still one of the most polluted air basins in the nation, and it's the most polluted for ozone. In the Aqmd, the Air Quality Management Plan, in 1 year alone, 4,000 people died in Southern California due to poor air quality, and thousands of more suffered from respiratory ailments. We're still on track to miss several key ambient air quality attainment deadlines, and violating the Clean Air Act risks the possibility of a strict federal implementation plan, loss of highway funding, and other draconian measures. To this end, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing clean air. Aqmd so far has taken reasonable, measured initial steps in response to the pandemic, and we appreciate that. However, this is an opportunity to transform the South Coast Air Basin's air quality. We urge Aqmd to commit to the following: developing and implementing an effective indirect source rule for the ports, warehouses, and rail yards, to continue protecting public health by rejecting requests from polluters to weaken, delay, or suspend the rulemaking process, continuing to invest in the clean transportation economy by incentivizing commercially available clean vehicles and equipment, funding the deployment and development of zero emissions technology, and facilitating the expedient retirement of diesel-powered vehicles and equipment, and finally by ensuring safe, equitable, and accessible methods of public participation for all Aqmd proceedings, both during the COVID-19 outbreak and afterwards. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez, for your testimony. And that concludes the public comment at this time. Well,
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Before you go into closed session, I just want to let you know that you and all the board members will be receiving a pop-up message that'll say go to closed session breakout room. All you guys need to do is accept that, and then you'll automatically be going into a secure closed session area.
Okay. Is there any other matter before the board before we go into closed session by my colleagues?
Yes, Dr. Burke, I had a question for Mr. Nastri.
Yes.
We've read the governor's order extending all sorts of compliance deadlines, regulatory deadlines, review deadlines for 60 days. I'm just wondering if you could articulate for us and for interested parties what sort of extensions we are offering here at the AQMD.
So we have extended the filing deadlines for some of the annual emissions report. We're actually working on a broader issue in terms of what are all the various issues that we're facing from the various industries. And so from that, what we're looking at right now is a case-by-case determination. We're trying to find out, are there opportunities? I hope to have something for release, if not today, perhaps next week. But we're trying to evaluate what all of those issues are. In part, it takes input from the members. This afternoon, we're meeting with many of the refineries. We're also talking to many other industries. We've talked with the metal finishers and others in terms of meetings that we have scheduled, their ability to participate in those meetings. So these are all things that we're looking at, Supervisor, and I would hope that, as I said before, we'll have something probably within the next week or so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So with that, why don't you send out the invitation to close session so we can go into that.
I know it's Mary McKellen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just, many try to cast the decisions the governing board makes in partisan political terms. As you know, and as the board members know, this is not a true. That's not true. It's disturbing to me when partisan politics is interjected by some of those who provide their comments to the board.
I think you're absolutely right. I know we all have our political views. We're not free of that. But when we come to this board, I think we look forward to executing the best air quality management rules that are practically feasible under any conditions. So I happen to agree with you on that one. Okay, any other comments? Let's send out the invitation.
It is necessary for the board to recess to closed session pursuant to Government Code Sections 54956.9 sub A and 54956.9 D1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation which has been initiated formally into which the SCA Aqmd is a party. The actions are INRI Excite Technologies, U.S. Bankruptcy Court, District of Delaware, case number 13-11482, KJC bankruptcy case, Delaware District Court, case number 19-00891, appellate case, People of the State of California.
closed all the rooms.
Okay. Bay, you're now unmuted.
A report of the reportable actions taken in closed session will be provided to the clerk of the board. The meeting is adjourned.
Yay.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.